It was 1973 on the Hong Kong set of Enter the Dragon. The environment was a chaotic, high-pressure mess that never made it into the final cut. Hundreds of extras were crammed into the frame. Stage hands hauled heavy lighting rigs across uneven floors, and shouts in Cantonese echoed from every corner. The air was a thick mixture of cheap cooking oil, diesel exhaust from the generators, and the suffocating humidity of the South China Sea. Under the 100-degree heat, the studio lights made it even worse. Sweat soaked through everyone's clothes, from the stars to the lowest-paid laborer. Bruce Lee was more than just the lead actor on this set. He was the center of gravity. He had a specific habit that kept the entire Golden Harvest crew in a state of constant tension. During the long gaps between takes, while the cinematographers were resetting the lights, Bruce wouldn't retreat to a private trailer. He stayed on the floor, moving among the people. He was always in motion, stretching, shadow boxing, or testing the reactions of those around him. It was a restless search for what he called combat truth. He might suddenly throw a palm strike that stopped a fraction of an inch from a stuntman's nose, or check the balance of a passing grip. He wanted to see who was actually present and who was just going through the motions. On this particular day, Bruce spotted a new face in the crowd of extras. He was a young American with a solid build, thick dark hair, and the kind of clean-cut, pretty boy Hollywood look that seemed out of place in the grimy, sweat-stained reality of the set. Bruce was used to the studio sending over handsome actors for the background to give the film a more Western appeal. To Bruce, guys like this were usually just scenery, people who would crumble the moment things got physical. The young man was Tony Danza. Long before he became a household name in sitcoms like Taxi or Who's the Boss, Danza was a professional middleweight boxer from Brooklyn. His record at the time was 9 wins and 3 losses, with all 9 of those victories coming by way of knockout. Danza didn't know Kung Fu, and he didn't care about flashy high kicks. He had been forged in the meat and potatoes boxing gyms of New York, where you were taught to hit through the target and never blink when a fist was coming at your eyes. He had heavy hands and the calm, steady breathing of someone used to being trapped in a corner. Bruce approached him with his signature springy cat-like walk, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet. He stopped about 3 feet away, his eyes scanning Danza's frame. The general noise of the set began to fade as the crew realized what was happening. Stuntmen and camera assistants started to linger, forming a loose circle. They had seen this test before, and it usually ended with the extra looking embarrassed. "You look like you move well," Bruce said. His voice was flat, devoid of its usual cinematic flair. He paused, looking at Danza's shoulders. "Are you just here for the camera, or do you have any real skill?" Danza didn't get defensive. He didn't try to play a tough guy character for the crowd. He simply took a breath and shifted his weight. He didn't drop into a deep, theatrical, martial arts stance. Instead, he made a subtle professional adjustment. He moved his right foot back about 6 inches, distributing his weight 60-40 between his legs, and softened his knees. His chin tucked naturally behind his lead shoulder, and his elbows came in tight against his ribs. It was the movement of a man who spent 10 rounds a day hitting heavy bags. Bruce's eyes narrowed instantly. He saw the shift in Danza's center of gravity. He realized He wasn't looking at an actor mimicking a fighter. He was looking at a specialist who understood how to hold his ground. "Show me your stance," Bruce said, already beginning to move. Bruce started circling to his left. His feet made a light, rhythmic shuffling sound on the dusty floor. He began probing the distance with lightning-fast feints, hand flicks that whistled through the air, stopping just an inch from Danza's eyes. Most people would have jerked their heads back or swiped at the air in a panic. Danza did neither. He kept his eyes locked on Bruce's chest, tracking the core of the movement. He moved his head, maybe an inch, just enough to let the feints miss, while keeping his feet perfectly positioned to counter. Danza decided to show Bruce that he wasn't just a target. As Bruce dangled his lead hand out, Danza unleashed a short, snapping left hook into the empty air right in front of him. It wasn't a movie punch. There was a sharp thud as the glove broke the air, the sound of a heavy weight being swung with total commitment. The rotation of his hips and the pivot of his lead foot were textbook. Bruce froze for a split second. He had felt the displacement of air from that hook. He looked at Danza's fists, then back at his face. The set was now completely silent. Even the generators seemed to fade into the background. "You have power," Bruce said, his smirk completely gone now. "But power is useless if you can't hit the target." The tempo shifted. Bruce turned up his speed, becoming a blur of lateral movement. He used side steps and quick level changes to circle Danza like a satellite. He began landing light tags, a back fist to the shoulder, a quick slap to the ribs. He was scoring points, showing that he could penetrate the boxer's guard and get out before a counter could be launched. Danza didn't chase him. He stayed in the center, pivoting on the balls of his feet, always keeping his shoulders squared to Bruce. He was breathing steadily through his nose, waiting for the one moment when the faster man would commit his weight. In boxing, there is a window of vulnerability when a fast opponent gets too comfortable. Bruce lunged in for a straight strike to the midsection, a move designed to intercept the opponent's rhythm. It was a high-speed commitment of his full body weight. Danza didn't step back. He performed a slip, a tight, economical tilt of his upper body that allowed Bruce's punch to slide over his left shoulder. In that same heartbeat, Danza stepped into the pocket, the dangerous space inside Bruce's reach where defense is thin. He fired a short, compact right cross. It was the punch that had earned him those 9 knockouts. Danza had the professional discipline to pull the punch about 2 inches before impact, but the momentum was so great that his knuckles still grazed Bruce's cheek. The movement stopped. Bruce was caught in mid-lunge, his balance compromised because Danza had occupied his space and timed his entry. For a moment, neither man moved. The extras and the crew were paralyzed. They all realized that if this had been a real fight in a Brooklyn alley, and if Danza hadn't pulled back, the world's most famous martial artist would have taken a professional middleweight's full power directly on the chin. Bruce stood up slowly and straightened his shirt. He wasn't angry. He looked surprised, as if he had just encountered a physical puzzle he hadn't expected to solve that day. He reached up, rubbed the spot on his cheek where the glove had made contact, and then he started to laugh, a short, sharp sound of genuine appreciation. "You're not an extra," Bruce said, pointing a finger at him. Who are you, really? Danza let his hands drop to his sides and exhaled, the tension leaving his frame. The fighter mask vanished, and he went back to being the guy with the easy smile. I'm just a guy from Brooklyn, Bruce, he said. I box. That's about it. The shoot didn't resume immediately. Instead of going back to the cameras, Bruce Lee sat down on an equipment crate and gestured for Danza to join him. For the next hour, the multi-million-dollar production waited as the two men talked. Bruce was obsessive. He wanted to know the exact mechanics of the Brooklyn hook, how the weight transferred from the hip, how the knuckles were aligned, and how boxers maintained that heavy balance while under fire. He treated Danza not as a background actor, but as a technical consultant. Bruce realized he had made the one mistake a master should never make. He had judged a man by his cover. He had seen a pretty face and assumed there was no warrior underneath. But Danza had reminded him that real combat isn't about how you look. It's about the physics of the moment and the discipline of the trade. When the director finally called for the next scene, Danza went back to his spot in the crowd. In the final version of Enter the Dragon, he is just a face in the background, a blur that the audience barely notices. But to the crew who stood in that circle in 1973, he was the guy who didn't need a script to earn the dragon's respect. Bruce went back to work, but between takes, he kept glancing over at the kid from Brooklyn. He had learned exactly what he needed to know, that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one who isn't trying to prove it. The set never quite returned to the same rhythm after that. Something subtle had shifted in the air, not loud, not dramatic, but noticeable to anyone who paid attention. The usual hierarchy, the unspoken order of who impressed whom, had been quietly rearranged. It wasn't that Bruce had been challenged in the way the tabloids would later exaggerate. It was that he had been answered. And on a set built around illusion, that kind of authenticity carried weight. For the rest of the day, Bruce's movements changed, not in speed. He was still impossibly fast, not in precision. If anything, he became even sharper. But there was a new layer beneath it all, a calibration. His feints became less theatrical and more surgical. His footwork tightened, minimizing unnecessary bounce. He wasn't performing now. He was refining. Every so often, during a reset, he would motion for Danza again. Again, Bruce would say, short and direct. No crowd this time, no circle forming, just two men and a quiet exchange of information through motion. Bruce would test angles, entering not from the front, but from the blind side. Danza would adjust, pivoting instinctively, keeping that same compact guard. Bruce would experiment with trapping hands, trying to immobilize the boxer's lead arm. Danza wouldn't resist force with force. He'd simply shift, disengage, and reset, like water slipping through fingers. At one point, Bruce stopped mid-motion and nodded. "That's it," he muttered, almost to himself. "No wasted energy." Danza shrugged slightly, wiping sweat from his brow. "In the gym, wasted energy gets you hurt." Bruce smiled at that. Not the showman's smile, but a quiet, internal one. The kind that meant something had clicked. By late afternoon, the humidity had thickened into something oppressive. The lights burned hotter, the air heavier. Most of the extras were exhausted, leaning against walls, conserving what little energy they had left. But Bruce looked charged. He called one of the assistant directors over and said something quick in Cantonese, then pointed toward Dancer. The assistant nodded and made a note. That evening, when the call sheet for the next day was posted, Dancer's position had changed. Slightly, almost invisibly. He wasn't just background anymore. In one of the tournament scenes, there would be a brief moment, a half-second longer than before, where the camera lingered. Not enough for the audience to consciously register, but enough for presence to come through. Enough for reality to leak into the frame. Dancer noticed it, but didn't say anything. That night, as the crew packed up and the generators finally went silent, Bruce remained on set longer than usual. He stood alone for a while, barefoot on the cooling floor, replaying the day in his head. Not the near contact, not the moment of surprise, but the timing, that tiny window, that perfect intersection of intention and opportunity. It fascinated him, because it confirmed something he had always believed, but now felt in a different way. Speed was an advantage, precision was an advantage, but timing was truth. He exhaled slowly, then began moving again, not fast, not flashy, just deliberate, controlled motion, testing angles, adjusting weight, stripping things down. Somewhere behind him, unnoticed, Dancer paused on his way out and watched for a moment. No audience, no pressure, just a man working. Dancer gave a small nod to himself, then left without a word. The next morning, the set buzzed back to life like nothing had happened. Cameras rolled, directors shouted, extras hit their marks. The machine moved forward. But for those who had been there the day before, there was a quiet understanding. They had witnessed something that would never make it into the film. Not a fight, not a victory, but a rare moment where two different worlds, flash and function, philosophy and practice, collided just long enough to sharpen each other, and then moved on.